Hey there, Jenny. Welcome back to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. Just before we hit record, we were just quickly chatting about when the last time you joined us here, which we were like, oh my gosh, it's felt like a while. I think episode 197, we talked with you, which would have been a couple years ago, and we've got you back. We're excited, and Yvette's here. She's joining us as well. So we are excited to dig into your summit session that's coming up, or if you're listening to this after the summit has already aired, we're going to talk all about must-know facts about Math Fact Fluency with you. So what's going on in your world these days, and how you been?
I've been great. I've been traveling quite a bit. I just came back from Canada. I've been able to travel around the U.S. talking about Math Fact Fluency and fluency beyond basic facts, and loving that work and really appreciating how teachers are putting in the hard work to figure out other ways to teach students than just, standard algorithms and drill. That's been taking up most of my time.
So as a veteran to this podcast, we love to start off by asking you about your math moment, something that has just really stuck with you and shaped who you are as an educator and a mathematician.
So I'll share one. As I was saying, I'm not sure if I shared this one before, but it's so important to my place in education now. I'm going to share it. And that is when I was a freshman in college, I was already taking math courses. Math was easy for me, but I was not going to become a teacher. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I was not going to become a teacher. But I went to a school to volunteer in elementary school, and I was asked to work with a student who was struggling with, believe it or not, their basic facts. And so they're like, can you help him? No manuals are given out for that. Just help him. You have 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So I did that. And I came back a week later, and the specialist met me at the door and said, what did you do with, I'll just call the student John. Is that okay, John?
Hey, that's okay. John often gets picked on when we give examples. Look at Johnny. It's always Johnny too, right? It's like, hey, let's call on Johnny.
Okay, Johnny. Anyways, I was, of course, first hitting the panic button that I had maybe, not taught him well. I don't know, because I didn't know what I was doing. But as it turned out, he had done very well on his basic fact test he'd had after he'd been flunking them consistently. And the teacher really wanted to know what I had done. And so I literally felt so good for the next few weeks that when registration came, I signed up for my first education course. So that was a special moment because what it came down to is him being able to realize that he did know some facts. He didn't just not know his facts. That's how he'd been characterized, but he knew a lot of facts. He had to sort through which ones he knew and how to use that. Now, it was years and years and years before I started focusing on basic facts, but it's a special moment because I would not have gone into teaching had I not met Johnny.
Your moment actually hit on one of my burning questions for you. So this is a selfish one. I think so much is not yet understood about true intervention and what do we actually do when students start to struggle. And I was fortunate to get to hear you speak at NCTM this year. And one thing that I took away from that session was that the research-based approaches that you're helping us to understand don't just work for the middle or high achieving students. It's about really reaching all students, in particular students who may be at risk or students who may have been perceived previously as not being good at math. So what is it about the research-based approaches that you're supporting us in understanding that are helping us meet the needs of these learners?
I'm going to start with a big picture response to that, which is whatever intervention you're doing, if it's helping the student make sense of what the math relationships are, it's probably a good intervention. And if you're skirting that making sense, you're trying to get around it, here's a quick fix, then it's probably not a good intervention. It's that, you're shortchanging the student in the way that that's a short fix, but in the long run, that doesn't hold up. So more so as a specific example, if students are needing intervention with their addition facts, you can sit there with flashcards and drill them. And a few minutes later, they're going to start remembering that fact because they just saw it, and maybe even a day or two later, but weeks later, they're not. And so memorizing is a weak learning strategy that's well established in the research. And it certainly is one of those strategies that doesn't work well with students who struggle. And so a much better strategy is strategies. And so if you spend the time investing in them, knowing that number relationship, that 9 is 1 away from 10, well, then if they know 10 and some more, as a sum, then they know 9 and some more. So I could give loads of examples, but that strategy instruction is teaching them an important number relationship that pays off later, that sticks with them. Maybe they just remember 9 plus 6, but if they don't, now they know 9 plus 6 is 1 less than 10 plus 6, or some kind of thing that's going to help them.
Yeah, and I know that we're gonna chat about your summit session, all around games and strategies and to strengthen basic math facts. And one of the things that I think often gets asked, and specifically if we're talking about intervention, or we're talking about like helping tier 1 instruction, like when we're helping students with basic math facts, is I think especially when you think about those teachers who are like, when you said maybe stop focusing so much on memorization and focus on strategies instead, what is the language you help a teacher wrap their mind around that? Because so many teachers, I think, are still, and we get asked this question a lot with the districts that we work with about like, how do we help teachers see that strategies is the way to go and not memorization? Because so many teachers, I think, are still stuck in like this is going to work because it either worked for them, or they just don't have the strategies in their pockets yet, and they're just not convinced. Like, how do you help just help them see that this is the way to go versus sticking to the same old?
So one thing I would say is that, are you talking about how a fact gets learned, or what the end result is, what the outcome is? So memorizing is a way that a student can get a fact down. So is working with strategies, right? So one is they memorize 9 plus 6, and another is they have been thinking about these number relationships. 9 and 6 is the same as 10 and 5, and that sort of thing. And then ultimately, the outcome for both pathways is that they just know 9 plus 6, that they can recall that fact. So helping, I think, for all of us to be very precise about our language helps, because memorizing is an act. Like, you memorize a phone number, you memorize your social security number, you memorize an address from staring at it and repeating it and repeating it and repeating it. But our basic facts are number relationships. They're about quantities that we're adding and subtracting, multiplying, dividing. So we learn them by building number relationships. And then the outcome is that we have this recall, because we've done it so many times through. So recall, that's an outcome, or automaticity, an outcome. How we're going to get there, memorize, that's a bad way. Strategy instruction, that's a better way.
I think there's also a lot of teachers out there that recognize that the way that maybe they're currently going about it, or the way that they were taught, didn't work. I'm one of those students myself where memorization was just never going to work for me, because I have to understand to be able to recall for sure. But I also wonder sometimes if that's all I know, if that's the way that I was taught, that's how my pre-service training, my mentor teacher showed me. But I recognize that I need to make a change, that I know that I can do better by my students. I believe the research. What would you suggest is almost like an initial step for those teachers out there who are saying to themselves, I recognize there's a problem. I know there's a solution, but I just don't know what to do tomorrow or next week to start to implement this change.
I have a book.
No.
A little purple book. It's also in French. That book's not purple. Math Fact Fluency. That really is very reader-friendly explanation of how to go about doing this in more detail. But simply, if that book is not something that a person wants to purchase, is to think about building on student strengths. And so I have this, learning progression that I'll talk about in my session that is, it's logical. So we start, I'll switch over to multiplication. So for multiplication, we start with our twos facts, because they come out of their addition tradition, knowing their doubles as addition. So we start with that and think about how 8 plus 8 is now thought about as 2 groups of 8, 2 times 8, and build the symbols and the language for multiplication to start there. And then we have place value understanding. So we moved our tens, and then fives, which are commonly skip counted instead of learned from memory, so they can recall them. We can use our tens to work with our fives. So I think a good place to start is just thinking about these facts that are super important to later use the strategies. So for multiplication, that's the 2s, 10s, 5s, and then after those, the special cases are the 1s and the 0s.
Awesome.
So I would recommend that. And then there are, the equivalencies with addition is starting with like combinations of 10. Do students really know their combinations of 10? And not just that 7 plus 3 equals 10, but that if I say 8, then you can say 2. You know the distance to a 10, because that's the kind of automaticity, recall you need in order to do the strategies. That's that intervention piece. Are they ready to do a strategy? Do they know those foundational facts before we move on to the other facts?
Would you recommend, like, I think when you're helping teachers, adopt these strategies in their classrooms, it's like, I think we're often faced with one of the barriers, I think, is teachers either just don't know the facts, but also aren't comfortable with, say, practicing this because they didn't learn it that way. And so they've got their own kind of history of the way they've learned math, and they're trying to wrap their minds around these strategies. But then they're like, I'm not going to, even though we just talked about which ones maybe to start with, it's like, do I start with those like on my own? Like, do I need to like practice this myself? And like, or do I like, or should I just jump in with like 2 feet and like, and I guess that depends on the person, because like, are you comfortable with like looking and feeling vulnerable in front of students, or are you not? And sometimes it's like, I always wonder, is like, how much of this are teachers being asked to do on their own, and then how do they take that step forward? Any recommendations for think of specific like coordinators, coaches who are working with teachers of like, how do I push the needle here to get more of this happening in rooms?
Well, I appreciate the question, because teaching is so much about vulnerability. And in particular, if somebody else is watching you teach, including your students, but if you have other adults in the room, it's even more nerve-wracking,
right.
And maybe parent volunteers or whatever. So it is about vulnerability to try something you've never seen done. And so, for example, with teaching the basic facts, a good way to learn the strategies is through doing like quick look images that have dot patterns, or like pairing up stories. And so you're doing a number talk, but a number talk with a very specific purpose of teaching a strategy. And so I like to call it mucking about. We're trying this out. Like, that number talk didn't go so good. Okay, well, tomorrow I'm going to do it this way, and then we just try it again. And it's then inviting to have another teacher there, where you're like, I'm going to do it today. Could we like talk about like whether this helped? And then right after that, number talk, let's say we're working on the making 10 strategy or something. So we've just done these quick looks to help them see what that looks like. And then they're playing a game. And so you can sort of observe whether your number talk went well or not based on whether students have picked up that idea you wanted them to in the number talk, which is very visible, strong with visuals and stories. Can they use that in the game, or they can't? And if they can't, then that's your own self-diagnostic.
Right.
How did that teaching go? Not very well. They're all still counting on their fingers, right? Or
right.
Let's go back and redo that. So I just think that's one of the beautiful things about teaching, is that we are constantly asking ourselves, did the way I approach this subject work?
Right.
And if not, change it. Like, we just have to give ourselves the grace that there aren't simple instructions to good teaching.
I think you touched on a big idea as well that John and I, mention all the time, the impact of that community, just having a community of educators invested in the same work so that we can visit each other and talk about what went well and do some co-planning. And that really comes from leadership, like having leadership that's also supporting this work and creating the structures and space for there to be collaboration in a collective journey. One thing we were wondering, actually, John and I, earlier today as we were prepping for this call, was imagine you walked into a classroom where these practices were in place. It's like the teacher has adopted and implemented this approach. What would tell you that it's happening? Like, what would you see happening in that room if there was full implementation of this strategies-based approach? What would be almost like the observable behaviors?
All right. Well, I'm imagining a number of classrooms I've been in because I've seen just some amazing teaching happening all over the place. I get to visit classrooms in lots of places. And so what happens is oftentimes you see early on in a lesson the number talk happening, children are around a circle. There's quick look images being shared or a story with relationships, and students are being asked, what do they see? What did they notice? Is there another, strategy they have? And then, a few minutes later, they're playing a game. They're laughing. They're saying their strategies aloud. They're arguing over whether the answer is 13 or 12, like with a passion that you really don't see when you're doing a worksheet. And so they're convincing each other what the correct answer is. And then the teacher is asking if they will now put that away so they can do the next thing. And the students do not want to. So that is one of the most beautiful things when the teacher's having trouble having them quit doing their math lesson because they're so engaged in the activity or game that they're playing. Mm-hmm. So that's what I imagine when I see basic fact fluency happening.
Right. You mentioned worksheets, and I want to bring this up because I remember reading this in your Figuring Out Fluency book series. Was that I think people often you hear like one side or the other in the worksheet camp. It's kind of like either we are all, like, am I using a worksheet or no, I don't use worksheets at all. But I mean, like, I think my big takeaways from a part you wrote in that book was like, there is sometimes a place for the practice and you can practice it with games, you can practice it with different activities. But what I think my big takeaway is like worksheets can be purposeful if it's very purposeful to the strategy you're trying to bring about. And I think what I remember was if the strategy we're trying to highlight here today is how do I craft the questions they say on that practice sheet so that it brings out the strategy, or like when we recognize that we're not supposed to use the strategy, like there was like a really nice fluid motion of like the way you outlined like what a worksheet should look like if you're going to use a worksheet. Because I think lots of people are like, no, I don't use worksheets, but I mean, they have their place.
They absolutely do. And I have spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to find a quality worksheet through Googling online. Right. I'm not having any luck because so many of the worksheets have way too little in the way of reasoning. I'll just leave it at that. The instructions might say, solve using the standard algorithm. Right. So if we just think, like, let's start with the instructions. There's so many things we could do, like just draw a line right through that and that detail there. Get your old-fashioned whiteout out, or use your technology tools to delete those instructions, and instead ask questions like, solve using a mental strategy or solve using a reasoning strategy, and otherwise solve with the standard algorithm. So they're thinking, is there a more efficient way I could solve this problem? Or the instructions could say, pick 10 problems on this page to solve. Make sure you use 3 different reasoning strategies on this page. So then they don't need to learn 30. I mean, they don't need to, right? So there's some ways to navigate the instructions. Or look through this page and circle 3 that you think blank strategy would work. Like the making 10 strategy is one that generalizes to bigger numbers, like adding fractions. Where could you use the make a whole strategy? Go circle the fraction addition problems where that strategy is a good idea. And then that's helping them notice that their job as a mathematician, when they look at a problem, is to decide how to solve it. Not to perform the standard algorithm that their teacher showed them. Their job as a mathematician is to make a decision. So if we can just frame the worksheet as make a decision, but therein lies the challenge. Because when I said I went looking for worksheets, I was looking for ones where you could change those instructions. Only all the problems on the page were either stupid, like adding fractions with weird denominators. Why are we adding like 11ths and 7ths? I mean, why are we doing that? But there aren't those opportunities to notice, oh, hey, I don't need my standard algorithm here. I could use something else. So if all the problems are messy, so they all lend to the standard algorithm, then it is just a rote exercise and there are those days where you're working on a standard algorithm, or days when you're working on a strategy where maybe they are all lending to that. For example, another classic one is when you're doing subtraction and there's a 0 in the first number. We call that lesson regrouping over zeros, regrouping involving zeros, whatever that is. That's a method, by the way, not a concept. That's a strategy in and of itself. But there could be two methods shown there. There could be the constant difference. There could be, or three methods, counting up and then regrouping. And then students, again, could be asked to solve one of the problems 3 different ways, decide which one they like, and then make sure they're using the different methods. And at the end, explain back, have a journal prompt at the end of the worksheet that says something around what are you noticing about when you want to use each of these strategies. That's a long answer, but I think the key is if you do nothing to the worksheet, but just open up the option of doing different methods, then you've changed it into at least a reasoning task.
And that really brings us to the big question I think we all have is around assessment. So what you're describing with these worksheets is that we're putting thinking central rather than, mimicking or following a procedure. And so what is an effective way to capture that student thinking when we're really trying to, engage in assessment? In particular, I think where some educators might struggle is something a little bit more summative, where they're trying to land on where this child is in the developmental trajectory. What is an effective way to gather that evidence?
So whether it's formative or summative, we have to move beyond just assessing accuracy. So you can't just give a score of how the percent correct and be really measuring fluency. So the real challenge is to think, well, how can I assess efficiency and flexibility? Right. So that's where those prompts need to come in. If you ask them to solve these problems, choose an efficient method and solve these problems, then you at least have the possibility of assessing actual fluency, the efficiency, flexibility, and accuracy. And you can do that a couple of ways. Like it's easy to score the accuracy, right or wrong. But the flexibility and efficiency can be scored on a rubric that just gets attached to the page, or you can give just make one up. 3 points means you demonstrated that you matched these problems with an efficient strategy, and a 2 would mean you mostly match them up, and a 1 means you're heavily reliant on one or 2 strategies, right? You're not showing that efficiency or flexibility. So I think giving that feedback to the student, it's an invitation to them. Hey, we want you to be more of a divergent thinker, not just do the same thing every single time. Think about this exact problem, how you want to solve it. So if we give them feedback on that, we're coaching them in the direction we want them to grow to become a mathematician.
Totally. And it's like communicating what you value. You can even say have that particular assessment as on, what we're looking for is because if we're assessing and it is a paper and pencil, say assessment, there's nothing wrong with telling your students to be on this assessment or on this day, we're looking for this, and this is what we're valuing here, and communicating that this is the way, we're going to grade your answer. And that we're really here to provide you some feedback so that you can, you take this and work with it and grapple with it. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of how we assess students and what we're really looking for and what we're really telling students we value. Because if you can be doing it in your classroom of okay, we really value fluency and basic math fact fluency, and we're going to do all these activities, but we're not shifting those assessment practices, kids pick up quickly on where the emphasis lies, and then they're just going to drift towards accuracy anyway if you're not in your actual lessons and activities, because they know that come test time, if you're or quiz time and or assessment time, you're not say honoring the actual elements of fluency, then it's almost they're not going to kind of pick up on what you're trying to put down.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And the reality is it's a lesson to ourselves too with basic facts that our outcome is recall of all the facts. It is. But it's also that they know these strategies because these strategies live a long life after the basic facts. So they can add 9 plus 6 by thinking of it as 10 plus 6 and 1 less. They can add 99 plus 26 by thinking, oh, that's 126, 1 less. Like those number relationships have a long life to support their reasoning and their flexibility. And so our outcome is both. So we have to assess and value their good thinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My big takeaway from our discussion here today is like that phrase you just said. It's like the outcome is the same. Like we're trying to get to the same place to have this recall, but we have pathways to get there. And which pathway is the more valid, or not necessarily valid, but what is the more honorable and worthwhile pathway we should be taking with our students to get to that same outcome. We can go in these two paths, but which one do you really want to take down, go down for those students? What would you say, like your sessions coming up at the time of this recording, if you're listening to this and we've already done it, you were participated in Jenny's session. Jenny, what would you say is like what would be a big takeaway if folks are sitting in the session and they're engaging with you? What do you hope that big takeaway is from the work that you're going to do November 15th, 16th, 17th, that weekend?
The research soundly supports strategies that build on students' number sense.
Awesome. That'll be awesome to kind of witness. I'm excited. This is one of my, I think, most exciting sessions that I'm looking forward to. And we want to make sure everybody knows that November 15th, 16th, 17th is the summit. It is coming up at the time of this recording, and we can't be more excited for that. There's going to be, I think, 52 speakers over the course of the weekend. At the time of this recording, there are 15,000 teachers registered. So it's going to be a blast over the course of that weekend. We want to thank you for joining us here today, and can't wait to see you live again in that weekend. But thanks for your time, and thanks for sharing your awesomeness with the Math Maker community.
Well, thanks for having me, and I can't wait for the conference.
Thank you.